going to go ahead and call this work session on AO 2019-116, and we also have an S version, building safety and fire department fees, fines, and penalties. Let's go ahead and do introductions, starting on this side.
Crystal Kennedy.
John Rattleton.
Meg Salatel.
Steve Peterson.
Suzanne France.
Felix Rivera.
Chris Schutte, Director of Economic and Community Development.
Bob Dole, the building official.
Linda Burris, Development Services.
Mark Meinhardt, Anchorage Fire Department.
All right, great. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, as you pointed out, there is an S version of 2019-116. I believe you should all have copies, and there's going to be copies on the back table. A few more are still printing as we go. Just real quick, there is only one change between the original version and the S version that we won't spend a lot of time talking about, but you can find it on page 4 or 5, where Section 5 starts. Section 5 is where we inserted a new section related to evaluations on remodels, and we'll cover why that section was added. This actually is a result of the AHBA, Anchorage Home Builders Association, briefing that we did on the fee increase 2 weeks ago, and Ron Thompson from that group really helped us flush out this particular section and why it's important. So other than that, everything else within the original ordinance is the same. And I'm going to hand it over to Bob. I'm really your Vanna White today, so go right ahead, Bob.
Good afternoon. For the record, I'm Bob Dole, the building official. Actually, the S version is on page 8 of 27 in the new format.
Thank you.
It's an alternate valuation for determining the cost of a remodel is the short version we'll get to. In order to look at this fee ordinance, the starting point is this affects the Building Safety Service Fund, so we need to first look at what is the Building Safety Service Area that it supports. The Building Safety Service Area is a unique entity that was created when the city and the municipality combined. Basically, within the city, there's a level of services where you need a building permit. That building permit then would draw additional services to make sure that the construction was done safely, and that was not present in the northern communities and the southern communities like Chugiak, Eagle River, and Girdwood. The compromise when they went forward was the BSSA, sorry for acronyms, in the center core area, and then in the outlying areas, you do not need a building permit and services that go with that. You can see the depiction there. It looks a lot like the traditional city limits because it is along the chart. Next slide, please. So inside the building safety service area, when you're doing construction or remodels, you need a building permit. That building permit draws a level of scrutiny first of the plan to make sure it complies with the building code, and we use the National Building Code as adopted as promulgated by the ICC with some local amendments. And second, the work is inspected to make sure it's done in accordance with the plan and the good workmanship for the trade. Our staff are ICC certified, and generally their journeymen are typically foremen and superintendents in their specific trades of structural, electrical, plumbing. They're specific to their trades and have spent substantial time in those trades before going forward. Next slide, please. So we talked about that bifurcated approach. Basically, we see building codes as a foundation, pun intended, for a safe building going forward. And we have some specific add-ons recognizing one size does not fit all in building codes. These come about by our local code committees of industry experts from private sector determining what we need here. Specifically, we have additional appendices adopted for high winds, heavy snow loads, and earthquakes. We also have some things that just don't make sense in the national code, so that they've gone to a different standard for doing those. As you know, Alaska has challenges. We also get avalanches, wildfire risk, lots of things to make things interesting. Do building permits make a difference? That was a subject of the earthquake symposium just held up here. The FEMA analysis shows that the damage rate for houses outside of the building safety service area post-1990 construction was 5 times higher. There is some debate about the seismic movement there, but I think the majority of those maintain the ground movement was greater. Inside the building safety service area, the damages were less. You look at that building on the upper right, you see that there's a structural collapse there. That is just a breach or loss of livable space, that's a catastrophic event if you're in that garage when that happens. All that the building code is designed to do is for not the moderate earthquake we had, but the strong design earthquake that's designed for it, not have that happen there. It isn't designed to keep cracks or broken windows, just that the building itself is survivable to go through it. For this moderate earthquake that was much weaker than only 40% of the design earthquake, buildings outside the building safety service area were disproportionately impacted. Next slide, please. So we have a distinct area here. It's not the entire municipality. Accordingly, it's only fair that those properties and not the entire municipality should pay for those services. We did that by the creation of a Building Safety Service Fund. My appreciation for those who came up with the title. My apologies to you all who have to listen to acronyms all afternoon. So the Building Safety Service Fund is based on the premise that you should charge the specific properties involved for the services involved and not the entire municipality. You do that by creating a certain schedule of fees for those inspections and those permits and the planning work that goes in there. And you create it at a level that carries from year to year, so that in a year where there is a lot of activity and you generate more than your operating expenses, you create a buffer for those years where you are not generating as much activity. Unfortunately, that hasn't been happening. Now, if we go to the next slide, please. Looking at 2005 forward, in only 3 of those years, and if you look at the bottom there in the blue, is probably the quickest place I'll direct you to. Those you see in green are the only 3 years we have generated surplus in operating expenses versus operating revenues. The other years we've been in a deficit condition. What a deficit condition means, probably to the comptroller or OMB, is that we're drawing money in a loan to the Building Safety Service Fund in order to pay for this level of services inside the BSSA. What it means in practicality is dollars collected from across the MOA are going used to pay for those BSSA services that are not available for Eagle River or Girdwood needs that would otherwise be there. And I would emphasize that we'll talk about some other capital outlays, but just looking at the operating expense of running the permit staff and the admin functions, the inspections, and the plan reviewers, we're operating at a deficit the majority of the time. Next slide, please. We also looked at this with to adjust for inflation, and you see the same condition up there. That is, where our current fee structure is not enough, generating sufficient revenue for the expenditures of just the day in, day out operations. Next slide, please. Quick definition for when you're looking at this afterwards and you're worried there's a quiz on those different things. Yellow is all revenues and all expenses to avoid the chaff of overhead or other issues there or set-asides. The blue is just where we isolated the operating expenses and operating revenues. To lay out further how we got there, that was fast. I want to draw your attention to this slide, and particularly some of those gray boxes you see up there. The Building Safety Service Fund, besides the ongoing operating expenses, have had some larger capital outlays. There's 2 significant ones. In 2005, there were some capital outlays because it was absolutely necessary to get the tax appraisal system for property appraisals in sync with the property out there. And they took a withdrawal from the system in order to pay for that. And also the system we use for administering the permit system called Hansen or Infor that does where we start a permit, where you can go online to request an inspection or check your permit status, where the plan reviewers put their comments to be resolved by the architects, where the inspectors show a complete inspection so that the builder can go on. That system also resulted in some capital outlays. Those were substantial amounts of money, but even without those amounts of money, the key takeaway is that we're operating at a deficit from year to year. However, those certainly make that number look bigger. Next slide, please. So what have we done over the years in terms of increased spending? We've reduced staff. We're doing our permits now with a third less staff, both in people and people per permit going forward. What does that look like going forward? Well, this year, average year, they're going to do 21,000 inspections. They're going to see 15,000 customers at the counter with an average time of 15 minutes, and usually it's far less or far more than that. That's what it averages out to. And last year we did about 2,664 permits, or correction, it was 2008. Last year about 2,600. We'll finish between those two is the activity that work staff is spread across doing in terms of doing things. For the service delivered, for like those inspections, when you're doing a project, your building inspections need to happen when they need to happen or your project comes to a standstill. We deliver about 98.8, 99.9 as scheduled, which usually means next day. When they don't, and that's usually about once a month, the project frequently comes to a standstill until that work can be done. So you have to have the right staff at the right time, or it creates a very economically difficult situation for the builders who have to idle their workforce, which is a key to us to not have happen. Directing your attention up here, if you remember the last slides and could correlate those in your mind over this, 2014 was the last year where we had a surplus. And you can see there looking at that, that was about 6,800,000. This year we're up about 12% over last year right now. I think we'll end up about 10%. So if you look at the two lines, the two purple bars to the left of the farthest one on the right, will finish midway between those two. It's well below that point in 2014 we need where we had our last surplus to actually refill funds in this account. Also, this year we're running a little bit higher on the commercial share. Commercial permits are evaluated at a higher rate. We're running about 80% this year, which is up about 6%, which is also a benefit in revenue. We're still not going to hit a break-even point in terms of revenue. Next slide, please. We looked at various factors that influence how we got to this point in terms of the different economic factors out there, and probably went a little policy wonkish overboard on it. I would say generally what I draw your attention to is oil drives the local economy, drives construction activity and valuation, which in turn drives the level of the BSSF, or how much money we're bringing in from the valuation of the construction activity. When oil goes down, the state economy goes down, local economy goes down, construction goes down, and the valuation of the Building Safety Service Fund really goes down. In terms of how we get to that.
I have a question on this slide. Ms.
Yeah.
Kennedy?
Actually, it's a question on the previous slide. Sorry. What was the line, the red line? It's really hard to see the writing. It's pretty
Sorry,
thin.
this is just a trend line for staff levels, and then this is the trend line for valuations, permit valuations.
The key point there being we've reduced overall from 58 to 38 staff over that time frame of those who are working in this process.
Okay, and sorry, then the green line is the valuation.
Valuation, that's a measure of construction activity in dollars. So,
But not in actual numbers, like 60 permits. It's okay. It's
no,
just-
yeah, if we look at actual permit numbers in the different years, they are up, but you can get one $6 million project that generates a lot more activity than $100,000 projects, which is why we looked at the dollars as a better measure. If you want actual numbers, we did 25,000 permits in 15 versus and 25,000 in 14. You can see the two very different lines there, even though for comparable permit numbers. And right now we're probably, I expect we're far under that in terms of, I'm sorry, I'm looking at inspections here. That's why those numbers are huge. But if okay. So if we look at those numbers, we did in 14, say 3,200 permits. We're going to do around 2,600 and change this year at permits. It's not proportionate though, because like the run up, right? Yeah. Just you take a commercial project with 200 people working on it, and a house working 4 people on it. Just that's why we recommend dollars as a measure of employment and economic activity.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry about that. Any good in that?
Yeah, I think we're good. Thank you.
Okay, so we talked about the different ways we look at the pool out there of activity. So there were some things that, besides the economic trends, that influenced how we believe we got here today. In 2009, there was a major change in the methodology for how we did our fee calculations. Up till that time, both the new and the remodels were done the same way based on valuation. That is, you would take the square footage of the amount being that was going to be under inactivity, and then you use certain multipliers to it from ICC tables that we adopted, and then a regional modifier. For remodels in 2009, we shifted to a per inspection cost of how we were going to do business. The belief was that certain small jobs were getting a free ride, so we were going to make an attempt to reach out and get those. That started accelerated our decline into deficit territory. It further accelerated in 2016 when we changed the base inspection fee. Basically, $75 are cut in half as the default to what we were charging for an inspection. So the biggest, I would say, change you see in this ordinance before you is we go back to the future in terms of how we're doing our valuation and billing and permit costs for those remodels. Instead of doing that per inspection, we go back to valuation, and then we use certain modifiers as necessary to get the right amount in the S version based on the amount of work being done. We get away from the per inspection cost. In doing that, we do two things. We believe that we free up a lot of inspector time and staff time to do what they should be doing, which is looking at trusses and not filling out paperwork for how much time they spend doing it, in terms of lowering the administrative time for them, also the permit technicians. We also, in the process of doing that, we think overall create a more equitable system, as we'll show in the following slides. Next slide, please. So when we brought this forward, HBA was very concerned that people would just lowball or not give a complete accounting of the cost involved in their work to avoid the full cost of a remodel. There's discussions about whether or not a contract, we should have them show the construction contract. To avoid those concerns, we looked at what other jurisdictions do on the West Coast, where they say, okay, we don't have to do that. Tell us what you're doing. We'll look at the square footage involved, and we'll take that new construction valuation and apply certain modifiers based on the level of activity. That's basically what the S version does, based on are you doing a minor remodel or are you doing a serious structural deep dive into the project.
Mr. Weddleton.
Well, it sounds when you do new construction, you have formulas in a book that says this is what that bathroom costs versus standard or something like that, and then use that for your evaluation. It's not really what they might be charging. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And this, it looks like this.
This offers an optional approach. We offer the permit applicant the option to declare their evaluation, and if it's in the range, we'll accept it. If it appears way out and we can't reconcile it with the level of work being done, they're changing a complete, moving every building, every wall in the interior, and they say it's a $100 work. This is another means we will have a plan reviewer look at the work being done to determine which of those four categories it would fall into.
And then just to add some further color to it, that the valuation table that you're referring to, the ICC valuation table, the building official will have the discretion to apply only a pro rata portion of the total valuation table to it. So as Bob was saying, if it's only a portion of a remodel, a kitchen, say, it wouldn't be, we're not charging against the full valuation of the ICC table. It's a proportion of that.
For the project being done, not the entire house or anything like that.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. And for members who want to look at it, it's on page 9 in the S version. Ms. Alatel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Usually when we have any kind of review by an official, there's a charge. Will there be any extra charge for this as a way to incentivize accurate reporting of evaluation, or is it just simply when it raises a red flag, you guys are going to do that internally?
Through the chair, Assembly members, so we normally do not, even now when there's a question of evaluation requiring additional review, we do not charge for that review. frankly, I don't think, looking at the time that would typically be involved for that, it'd be cost effective to do so. If necessary, we could certainly look at that if that's the will of the body and show you what we think that. But even now, when we look at the discussions out there, this comes up maybe once every 2 or 3 months, a discussion of it, and usually it's a half hour or 45 minutes of staff time to find a way forward. And we frankly spend more than we get back in staff time of billing, creating an invoice or bill for that or adding it on.
Thank you.
Yep. So of note, what it does not change is we're using the existing multipliers and valuation from 2009 going forward. What's really great about these is the valuation of the different rates. When you look at the valuation that comes out every year on the cost per foot that we adjust from, it adjusts for inflation or deflation. So by using those set rates for those multipliers, in this part, we continue a process we already have built into SAP and which works very well. You see in the upper right-hand corner there's an example of what happens. You're going to take the square footage for a given project. Let's start with new here for the discussion. You're going to look at what type of occupancy that is. You're going to look at what the ICC says is the average cost nationwide for construction of that in a given year. You'll do the multiplication. And then the assembly has created a regional multiplier of 1.3, which is very close in line with ICC research in terms of the additional cost of building above in Anchorage as opposed to the average. And then when you multiply those out, you get that baseline value of what the project is worth. From there then, depending if it's residential or commercial, and the commercial value, you do the next 0.015 or 0.010, or as the case may be, multiplication down there to get the price of the job. With that, all your inspections are included, with one exception we'll talk about later on. Your plan reviews are included as well. So in terms of what the engineers in the different disciplines are looking at for you.
Mr. Whittleton.
Okay, I'm sorry, maybe, so, by the way, my previous question, I see you answered in the line there, so.
You were just ahead of
that
us.
far, so, we're behind you. Is this for both the new and the alternate way for?
So this is the existing way and the new way for new construction. The difference is this is the starting point now as an alternate for remodel if there's a discrepancy, plus one of those 0.20, 40, 60, or 80 multipliers depending on the scope of work. But this is what we've been doing formulaically since 2009.
So if I were to do a remodel, like a kitchen, something that's fairly substantial,
Right.
then you could do it by this, and then there's no individual inspection fee, if you call it electrical inspection, so that's already covered.
Correct.
It's just this fee. But did you compare how a project would, the typical, I mean, was it kitchen, you just do kitchen remodels all the time?
We were going to go into the specifics afterwards. We've done some extensive comparisons. For some of the smaller projects, it may come out more expensive under this approach, or cheaper. It varies. We looked, Assemblymember Dyson asked us specifically to look at a house in distress on Richmond Street in terms of some issues with it. We use that as a sample equivalent to a vacant abandoned building in terms of the cost of the two models. Because it would house 7 families under the commercial rates, this would result in $200 less in permit cost under the new approach than the old approach. It would be cheaper for you. On the other hand, there's some bigger commercial remodels that are more on a $2 million project. It may be another $20,000, for instance. So it's very back and forth. I think the difference being the number of inspections under the old model versus how many it actually adjust the valuation under the new. There may be a cost point for a smaller project like reshaping one window. You don't need a permit to change out a window. You do if you got to cut around and make it bigger. Where the assembly may want to look at a cost threshold where there's a break-even point. I think probably doing math in public is around $1,000 or a project of that size, where you may want an option. For anything bigger than that, some go up, some go down. Many times, though, because you're not doing multiple, because you get out of the inspections. It's surprisingly competitive to go with the new model.
Thank you.
So this is the formula we talked about. It is third-party ICC based in terms of those different factors that came out there. I would like it to be the major takeaway. Next slide, please. So turning to some projects there, we talked about the difference in under the status quo of remodels versus new construction. And we took what looked like, again, using valuation of project as a measure of work involved. We took what we thought were some comparable jobs there. And the takeaway on these is usually the remodels require far more inspections. Just you have to look at old stuff, sometimes partially covered. It's far more difficult. On the other hand, they are substantially less. This would bring back parity in the price for those, even though frankly the remodels would probably still require far more inspections. It also, the difference right now between number of inspections and cost, that is 90 to 95% of that fiscal whole we're talking about in terms of the difference between operating expense and operating revenue. The other 5% is we just haven't adjusted for inflation and some of the flat fees along the way. An inspection is $75. If you can get a journeyman trade person to come out to your place to do an inspection or a job for $75, that includes their overhead of their vehicle, their insurance, their training. They're looking at the plans and code beforehand. They're writing a report afterwards, and the staff to bill it and document it. Keep that person in your Rolodex because they're a great deal. But that's what we're doing right now with folks.
Ms. Kennedy.
Yeah, but isn't that based on a 30-minute? It's not based on an hour.
It's a minimum call. Frankly,
So
because
it's
of
$150 an hour.
it's $150 an hour. However, frequently that also includes windshield time, as is the business standard. That's true. But even at $150 an hour, if we look at the trades out there and include the overhead, I would posit to you it's a pretty competitive rate for a single person out on a job doing that level of work when you have the master level doing inspections or troubleshooting.
Thank you.
Realize too that these same staff are the ones that license those other trade people who come out. So the folks that you have coming out to do those inspections also oversee the hands-on licensing for the municipality, which is necessary for the state to also issue their licenses. So here's the comparables we talked about. As you can see, overall, new construction results in a higher permit fee and fewer inspections. Are there any questions? Okay, moving along. We also do some general, what I call cleanup with this. We adjust fees that haven't been adjusted for a while, like elevator inspections to adjust for inflation. We reset that base inspection fee from $175 from $150. Again, recognizing the inflation changes since 2015, we were well within line. We create an annual inflation adjustment for fixed fees so we don't have to periodically come back to the assembly, taking the assembly's time and in turn losing buying power in between. We also address with the retrofit permit fees, we created a carve out for hot water heaters, but otherwise also adjust those from $175. Also not reflected on the slide, but one of the related issues for on-site, we water and wastewater systems, wells and septic systems. Right now, the regulatory scheme only allows one fee if you have one of both of those. We create a 50% off if you only have one of those. If you have a well and you're on a city sewer, we shouldn't be charging you the whole fee. So we created a means that we would only charge you for half of that. Just one of those minor cleanup things going along the way. Other changes out there, we made the grade and fill permit system a lot easier to manage. Plan review fees are Title 21 fees. We went back to the pre-2009 version of valuation for those in terms of basing it off the overall valuation. Important here, it's a different approach than we're using now, so it isn't just a fee increase. Generally, on a new home of typical value of $300,000 to $400,000, that's about $200 to $300 increase in the cost of that new home, that $400,000 home going forward. We also to just get away from some ambiguity we were having with commercial re-roofs, we went back to the prior practice also. Outside of the BSSA fees that are related to, the re-inspections. An issue that, yes.
Yeah.
Back up one, everybody. You know, the plan review fees, you know, if you built a 10,000 square foot house on a hillside, or if you built a 3,000 square foot house on a hillside, the land use issues are identical. One would pay vastly more than the other. I mean, this doesn't seem like it's related to the work you're doing, right?
So, the fees have both been valuation based. We've been using different bases for doing it. If you're building that 10,000 square foot house, odds are it's on a different shaped lot in a with different challenges to it. Just a larger lot, different issues. I think more likely what you're going to see as you go with that, you're less likely to be building that 10,000 square foot house on a 4,000 square foot lot in infill downtown where all the infrastructure is in place rather than on the hillside, that the challenges are far greater in terms of assessing road adequacy, what it's going to take if for off-site infrastructure, if any other road improvements involved or other things like that. Fire access is a different issue to deal with. But the factors are typically far greater with the larger houses in terms of the issues they create. But we're just using a different valuation methodology that we think better captures the cost of the staff doing it.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so do we charge the same fee for an electronically submitted plan versus just somebody who walks in with a blueprint that you have to look at? Or is there a difference, or does everybody do it electronically nowadays? Or?
Okay, so the answer is generally yes. The important caveat there is we have what are called exempt plans. An exempt plan is reviewed by a third-party reviewer, so we only do zoning plan review. But if we're doing everything in-house, if you do it electronically, that's it's growing, and we have one particularly residential builder who's largely trying to shift to it. Or if you do it paper, we charge the same rate at this time.
Okay, so obviously it takes you less time to do the electronic way, or it still takes the same amount of time?
That is highly, through the chair, Assemblymember Peterson. I think it really depends on the quality of the plan. Also, the complexity. For the more complex plans, if we have papers here, I can take this apart and flip these two and put them next to each other, as opposed to have to flip between different screens. It's a really great question. I urge you to come out and sit down with one of our plan reviewers, but it really depends on the project, both in terms of complexity and the quality of the work submitted.
Well, the construction industry was sort of pushing to be able to submit those plans electronically because they thought it might speed things up. And if it isn't, then
Through the chair, Assemblymember Pearson, I believe it certainly will. We're kind of at a starting point now. And if we had our druthers, we would shift more and more to electronic, because I have rooms of plans that it scares me when the fire marshal's team comes through that I'm going to be shut down. Also, one sprinkler going off, those plans are lost. They are very difficult to manage. There's an added administrative cost in handling those. The flip side of that being the homeowner who wants to do an addition, do we have to force him to go out to an engineer or an architect to put those on electronically for him? We would create a substantial cost there that I maintain for many of the projects. We have some very capable Alaskans who can come in with a hand-drawn schedule, get them there. So we'll take either, we'll work with either, we'll work with an engineer, we'll work with a homeowner on their first time. I think electronic is the way of the future, but it is vital, particularly for the homeowner builder, that we preserve that paper path.
well, the biggest pile of plans I've ever seen is I had an uncle who was an electronic contractor in Phoenix, and he got the contract to do all the electric for the new University of Phoenix football stadium. $22 million contract, and this was like a dozen years ago. And he had about 6 or 7 trailers there, and each trailer had all these desks with all these plans on it. It was insane, but they got done ahead of schedule and under budget. So,
And on the job site, you may very well need a paper plan anyway to get where you need to go, if you have an area with weak internet or whatever. So we like electric plans. We think they're the way of the future. On the other hand, a lot of ways paper is easier for a lot of jobs.
Thank you. Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Typically, a home builder will have a handful of plans, floor plans that he or she offers to customers. So once somebody has a plan, house A approved, do they have to go through the same review plan every time if it's the same floor plan? Or do you give them some kind of a discount, benefit, say, yeah, we've seen this one before, we don't have
Sort
to
of,
review
yeah.
it, so.
Sorry, go ahead, Bob.
Through the chair, first, no two lots are the same. So even if that house is the same, particularly how it attaches to the ground through the foundation with soil conditions or all, that part is frequently different. The elevations are different. So you may have you may have a set plan, but it doesn't always. There's some variation there. But again, we base on valuation, not on plan review time. And I am being reminded too of the pre-approved rate. What were you pointing to, Linda?
Yeah, pre-approved rate.
That's what it's called, a pre-approved plan review for new buildings, and that's based on a plan. And because we have the same reviewers from project to project, if this is the 4th identical home from the identical builder on a lot with comparable ground conditions, maybe not identical but comparable, there is a reduction in the price there. And that reduction reflects they still got to make sure it fits that lot, but it's far simpler.
Okay.
Can I add to that too? And he mentioned it earlier. Most single-family homes go through an exempt plan review, meaning that we're not reviewing the building plans on the home, and we're being reviewed by a third-party private engineer. And so the exempt plan reviewers, we touch it when it comes in on the zoning side. As Bob said, no two lots are the same, even in the same subdivision. But for the actual house plans, typically, at least, not for custom homes, maybe not, but for the model home you described, they'll go through an exempt plan reviewer.
And for the majority of those, we don't see the majority of your spec homes anymore. They are through that exempt plan review. We don't bill at all for plan review on that.
Yep.
We still do inspections on them at a lower rate, but we don't do plan review.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. So I said there was one exception for all inspection fees completed or included in the permit fee. That one exception is when an inspector goes out, determines that certain work, it doesn't meet the plans or the required quality of the particular trade and says it needs to be redone. They come out a second time and the exact same discrepancy at the exact same place has still not been fixed. At that time, for the next inspection, we would go up to a $350 rate. The belief is on the first time, if there's an ambiguity or miscommunication, we don't want to penalize the homeowner who's trying to build it themselves or the builder. After that, though, we believe it's incumbent upon them to have addressed it. So it's kind of the one free redo rule, if you will, comparable to what some of us had in college classes with our exams. We could redo one test during the year. It's kind of the same item there going forward, and that is the same item in the same place. So if an inspector comes out and says that door has the push bar at the wrong level for ADA compliance, and comes out and that bar is fixed, but the push bar on that door is off, that's a new one. It isn't that isn't a failure though. The same discrepancy at the same place or the same part of the job site. So if they find the same problem elsewhere in the job site, we're not going to invoke the $350 fee. We'll write it up as the first time there. Next slide, please. We talked then about fee changes outside the building safety service area. These are those pretty much for just adjusting for, again, some of the additional costs that we have and to better make to better match the work effort with the cost involved. And I think those pretty much speak for themselves. There's also some fire department new and changed fees in here. Bart is here to address those in any detail you may want.
Ladies and gentlemen, so, first part here is a $75 base inspection fee. This is not related to building construction, but this is related to the fire department's annual periodic inspections when we go out to do hotels, educational facilities and stuff, where we have a base fee currently right now of $35. Average time that we spend on site with a building owner on their building for a small operation is anywhere between an hour and 2 hours to go over their fire safety and examine their building and help them out to try to make sure they got a safe facility for their clientele and the building. So we're trying to cover some costs there. You know, fire prevention inspectors are, you know, funded through taxes and stuff, but there still is a cost of doing business out there. New registration fees. Right now, we're proposing a $250 registration fee for a company that does not have a contractor's license, and a $50 fee if they're already an MOA contractor. And what we're looking at there is, we've got companies coming in from the lower 48 out of Phoenix and California stuff. They come up and they perform inspections up here, and we don't know who they are. There's no contact information for them. We may or may not get reports for them. So before they do business within the municipality, they're disclosing who the people are, the qualifications to work on fire and life safety systems with us. One of the reasons we did reduce it for 50 is contractor's license. We already know who they are. Now we're just looking at their qualifications of their personnel. Ma'am? Oh.
Yeah.
Thank you. So the fire inspection fee, does that include religious assemblies?
Yes.
Okay, and that would also then include those authorized for emergency shelter. Would that be a separate fire inspection fee, or would that be simply the one that they already had?
The cold weather, so anytime
Yeah.
we go out is the $75 fee would be. So, you know,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Yes, Mr. Wells.
Maybe if you could embellish a minute, because I look and say, well, so someone doing monitoring, I mean, why would you charge them? I mean,
Monitoring.
I have Guardian doing it, I don't know if they're good or bad or if they pay that, but it's between me and them.
We're
Why
looking
are
at-
you even involved?
Because it's governed by NFPA 72, which is the fire alarm code. So there's a bunch of requirements in NFPA 72 that require them to meet certain standards for having equipment, number of personnel, response times, and everything. So right now, Guardian's up here, they're local, but everybody else, for the most part, is lower 48. You got U.S. Monitoring, who's out of Florida. You've got Simplex Grinnell that has 4 or 5 central stations around the country. We're talking to fire dispatch. When they get a call from these companies, they're dispatching out and saying, hey, we're XYZ monitoring company. You got a fire at, you know, City Hall here. When they hang up, they have no way to get back to them. They don't know who they are, and you know exactly how many monitoring companies we have around the country that are doing monitoring in the municipality of Anchorage. So in the code committee for the code adoptions for the 2018 codes, which you guys haven't been involved with yet, this was vetted through the engineering community, multiple fire protection companies that do monitoring, and they all agreed that the basic service and, you know, registration and a cost to register for the fire department to monitor, you know, what's going on out there was applicable.
Well, I hate just the fact that you added some information to your address book, that there was a fee, but, which it kind of sounds like in some regards, but now do you actually go and inspect these places in lower 48 to see if they meet
We
the
would
requirements?
have to, if we went to lower 48, we would have to probably have
And then it's too low,
$10,000.
so there's this fee.
So what we're looking for is for every, you know, monitor, you know, for them to fill out an application, tell us what type of monitoring facility they have, if it's proprietary, if it's a UL central station. By code, somebody can set up a monitoring station in the basement, and they don't have to meet any standards that UL central station would have to meet for security and all that stuff and backup. So we're just trying to figure out, you know, what do we have out there? and how much interaction we're gonna have with these people. And when we need reports from them on activity for a fire alarm and stuff, who do we contact? You know, it's gonna take some time to set this up, monitor, and keep updated with them and who their point of contacts are and what accounts they have within the municipality of Anchorage.
Thank you. Ms. Kennedy.
My question's along the same lines, John's, because I'm having a hard time deciding how somebody's home monitoring system.
This is not home.
This is all businesses.
This is
not home.
This is commercial fire, so this would be your fire alarms, your fire sprinklers. It has nothing to do with residential security.
Okay, but even if it's a company and they've contracted with somebody local and independent or somebody major out of state, if there's a fire alarm that goes off, that company calls 911 on behalf of, here, in this area.
I wish I could say that, but right now we've got one under investigation that is, it's a hotel, and they are not calling the fire department when they have a fire alarms activation in the building. They're calling the building operator, and they are not dispatching the fire department at all. And we know of at least 2 incidences in the high-rise facility that have not been dispatched.
That they had a real fire.
They had
'Cause I can
smell,
see
they
where-
had smell of smoke, and they did not evacuate the facility.
Okay, well, I guess someplace like that, though, would have a manager on board. I mean, the school districts do it too. The school districts, when they've got an alarm go off, the first thing they do is go, is that a real alarm or not? And then they hurry up and call AFD to make sure, if it's not, to cancel the alarm because they'll get charged for it. So sometimes those alarms get triggered, but they're not necessarily a real alarm. So the management of that particular facility has the ability to say, yes, so you're either looking at your alarm panel and trying to find out what's going on, or you're talking to your service company and trying to figure out, yes, is this legitimate or not? So do you make a provision for that conversation that's happening to try to assess what's really going on?
So typically what happens, when you talk about charge for alarms, in the codes, if it's an actual activation of a smoke alarm or manual pulsation and stuff, there's no charge for the trucks to roll. The false alarm charges only apply to malfunctions of the fire alarm system, where there's, system short circuits and sensitive trucks. Good example would be the Barrett Inn before it sold. There was people going out to the hallways and they're smoking underneath the smoke detectors. Actually went off, wasn't a malfunction, it was the clientele. They weren't getting charged at that point for the trucks to roll. Even though it was a waste of resources because their clientele was doing it, fire alarm functioned as it should.
But don't these individual company or individual commercial building managers have the ability, though, to make that distinction before they would actually want a call to go out?
They don't. The code requires them to be third-party monitored, and the fire alarm code requires, as soon as the fire alarm activation comes in, we're automatically dispatch the fire code. Now, there's times they will call and investigate, hey, it was a false alarm, they'll call back, fire department. Fire trucks are already on the way, they'll downgrade from code red, lights and sirens, to code yellow. The trucks still show up, and they still check to make sure the building's safe. But we do want to get the trucks out there and make sure they're responding, to the life safety situation out there.
Yeah, I guess I'm just saying that with these kinds of services, the idea is to have somebody that's monitoring them so that if an alarm goes off, they either need to call the manager of the building and say, hey, is this really what's going on? Do you want us to call 911? So that's one of the beauty, I guess, that's probably one of the benefits of these kinds of things, so that you can make that distinction and you don't have to unduly call out emergency responders for a false, not necessarily a false alarm, but like you said, it wasn't a false alarm that it detected
Right.
smoke, it was doing its job. But the fact that it was somebody standing there with cigarettes, very different than it was a floor,
Yeah.
carpet,
So, I mean,
carpet fire. But,
with the state adoption of the building codes and NFPA, we're already under state law that these monitoring companies operating within the state have to automatically dispatch. They are not supposed to call they're not supposed to call the building owner until after they've already called the fire department. Then they can call the building owner, discuss what's going on, and if they need to, they can just at that point call the fire department and say, hey, false alarm, we don't need you. But the idea of the code is to get the trucks moving immediately out there.
So you're saying by code, they are required to call 911 first rather than the owner of the building
Correct.
or the manager?
Yes, we're supposed to immediately call the fire dispatch center for NFPA 72 requirements.
Okay, all right.
That's for next week.
Pardon? Okay. Permitting fees. Okay, permitting fees. To the code committee for the 2018 adoption, we've added some new fees out there. Energy systems, which we were already doing generators. Energy systems now is a broader
Sorry,
term.
Mr. Peterson, do you have a question?
I know we're probably running close to time here, but so if you're just going out to do a routine inspection of a business to see if their fire extinguishers are up to date or whatever, that's going up from 35 to 75 now?
Correct, and that fee hasn't increased since the early 2000s.
Because I remember when they used to inspect for free. I mean, so just.
Right.
I think.
Unfortunately, our city's grown bigger and bigger, and so as we're going, energy systems now incorporates beyond just an emergency generator. It covers battery systems, hydrogen systems, whatever comes up in technology nowadays, and is covered. And we are dealing with systems that are running elevators, emergency lights, fire and life safety functions out there. We've added new fees for access control, and access control is not your typical building access control where I'm just got a card reader to get into the building. We are only looking at access control for when it restricts egress, when they want to put magnetic hardware on or delayed egress into the building to restrict it. Digital alarm communicators are the dialers that dial out to the monitoring stations. They've never been permitted out there in the past. They're part of the fire alarm code. The fee with the digital alarm communicator would not apply on a brand new fire alarm installation. It would be included into the fire alarm. It would only apply when somebody did third party afterwards. They want to switch out their equipment, so we can go out there and verify that the signals are going out to the monitoring correctly. Smoke control and smoke exhaust systems typically only happen in buildings that are high rises and have atriums, multi-story atriums. We see this about once every 5 to 10 years, smoke control system. Demolition permits is for fire and life safety systems. This is basically mirroring onto the building side of the code where they require demolition to remove stuff out of the building. We work closely with the fire industry, the sprinkler and fire alarm and kitchen installers on the retrofit fee. This is to allow them to do a quick permit with no plan review and no plan review and drawings for a repair of a fire alarm system or expansion of a fire alarm of limited amount of devices. I think sprinklers, I added up to 6 sprinkler heads. Fire alarm system is approximately 8 devices out there, and the kitchen system's adding a couple different nozzles out there. So it's to try to speed up the process and make it more functional for the contractors as a cost savings. Alternate needs for rural areas with the wildland urban interface that we have up on the hillside and stuff, and the lack of water that we have. We are looking at allowing a plan review where they use the wildland urban interface code, which allows them to use rated construction for their home, clear space, vegetation that is resistant to burning. So we've got plan review time involved in that right now that we review and we don't charge for. So we're just trying to capture some costs at plan review time and give owners an option to use alternate means out there than to bring in a water line into the area and fire hydrants, which can be very expensive.
Mr. Wells.
Wait, is this done now, this activity?
We do it now on a limited basis, and usually we have no mechanism to charge for that.
Well, what case would you do this? So, Otter Highlands,
Outer Highlands, or any of the new developments that are up high on the hillside, or it's a single-family home on a lot that is being developed somewhere up in the high mountain area that has no water, and they want to build this 4,000 or 5,000 square foot house, which would technically require about 1,700 gallons per minute of water for firefighting capability, and there's just no capability, there's just no way to get it up there. So it allows them to use, alternate means to create the house a little fire resistance, add a sprinkler system, something to give them more time that, when the fire department's responding, it gives us time to get up there and they don't have a total loss of their house. So.
And this, you do this now? There's the houses up there reviewed by fire, you have.
We do
requirements?
anything over about 3,600 square feet, we do look at for fire flow, which is already adopted in the International Fire Code.
Thank you.
We do a lot of, when we get into driveways, and again, the hillside and stuff, where we've got long driveways beyond 150 feet, we require a turnaround up on the driveway to allow for fire trucks and ambulances to turn around instead of having to back out of a driveway. So we typically do these as counter reviews. Right now, we have no way to charge for them, so it's a $75 fee to review these facilities.
Mr. Chair, do we need to extend this meeting by maybe 10 minutes?
Please.
So, do we need to do that? Sure. Okay.
I'll move to extend the meeting by 10 minutes.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's just
I'll see if I can speed up a bit.
I
Sure.
got things to do.
$175, this is the plat review for new developments. So right now, we're doing this at no charge to the builders out there for fire access and water for new developments. Right now, we're proposing a $175 fee for up to 12 lots, and then $87.50 per additional block of 6 lots.
Thank you, Bart. So what we're handing out right now, we're going to change gears back out of fire and back into building safety. And Bob and Linda prepared some comparables that they put in front of you, and Bob's going to walk you through those.
Talking real fast, so what you have before you here is we've taken some existing projects and placed them out under the new scheme as well. You will see generally for new construction, it's within a few $100s of old construction that you have going out there. When you get into the remodeling side, because of the different methodology, you see different, some up, some more, some less. Generally more, I'd say overall. I would ask you though to look at that not in terms of percentage of the fee, but also in percentage of the overall project. Going from $15,000 to $25,000 may seem like a lot, but when you're talking about a $6 million project, you're going to have far more greater swings than that minor amount just in change in minor things that happen during the course of the project. The one you see highlighted there is the Mother Lawrence one I talked about before. Had that been an individual home rather than a commercial home where we'd have had a base price of $350, it would have been about half the price under the new scheme as the current scheme for a $15,000 remodel there. The secret being for a property in distress, the more inspections it takes, the more pricey it is under the current model. However, we think that gets factored out for the low-end ones, but we have better pricing for the large projects under the new process. Standing by for the questions of the assembly.
I have a question not related directly to this, but as I'm going through the new charts, it's really hard to compare them to the old fees. Did you guys ever make a chart where you have old fee, new fee, like side by side somewhere between bouncing back and forth? Because I'm trying to get a sense on some of the other increases. So if it's around, that would be great. Otherwise, we're going to have to manually go do it.
Looking at Linda, I don't know if you did that.
Through the chair, we can assemble those comparison tables where fees go from like 150 to 175 for the set fees. For the different methodologies such as valuation versus inspections, that's really not an apples to apple comparison. But for just a straight fee, a flat fee increase to a flat fee increase, we'll develop a chart.
In case it's, tables like 3F, 3G, 3H, I'm having a hard time tracking.
We can do
all of
that.
Yeah,
Thank
we'll,
you.
we'll develop something
Thank you.
for the assembly.
Thank you. Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you. I have some questions about just kind of what's been going on with staffing, not just the numbers, but the cost of those. I mean, obviously there was like a change from maybe 38 down to, or up to, yeah, from the last couple of years, we added 3 people. And obviously there was a big drop back in the 2008, 2009. So what's really driving the cost of those staff now? Is that a reflection of the expertise you're hiring, or is that the whole benefits problem, or?
Through the chair's complete candor to the question, it would be the collective bargaining agreements the assembly approves. As you know, labor costs go up with, and that's what it reflects. However, the level of expertise you get there, looking at the work they're doing, finding means on a hillside project 2 days ago to avoid a truss on a reconstruction, or alternate means for an electrical system for a small business person. I think it's saving a lot of entrepreneurs in the field, but that staff cost is a reflection of overall collective bargaining agreements.
And that, if I may, I'll add some color to that too. Two of the other key changes over the past 3 years have been Bob, for starters. We haven't had a permanent full-time building official over the past couple of years, so that's a cost that's been being reflected in this year's budget to actuals. And then on the code enforcement side, you'll remember that we added a position to that division as well in the last budget cycle, and that's in response to the growing concerns that we had over dangerous, unsafe, vacant, and abandoned properties, and keeping up with the workload to respond to those kinds of enforcement actions. But largely within the sort of the core functions of the department, there has not been a lot of growth and or movement within, say, the plan reviewers or the inspectors.
Sure.
Another question with regard to, oh, so just in terms of timing as well, does the current staffing allow for pretty immediate responsiveness to the requirements for inspections, or are builders having to wait 3 or 4 days for somebody to come out, and that slows down all these people? I mean, what's that look like in terms of the staffing level?
Through the chair, I can leave you our performance measures. 99.8 to 99.9% of the inspections are done next day. 3 or 4 days will put a builder into bankruptcy.
Exactly.
It's next day, other than something bizarre happening on a site or
earthquake?
something else. Or I had inspectors on a structural site doing 16 inspections a day for the last 2 weeks. I mean, which is about capacity there before we incur other overtime costs. But that is the other challenge. I can't get these builders to build in December. They all want to build in building season, so I need the staff to accommodate them in building season. We're going to do some other process improvements outside of building season, but building season right now we're hitting basically 1 inspection a month slides to the next day, and we triage those to have the least damage as possible to the job sites out there.
Okay. Then what happens with that staffing and the requirements on their time when we're not in construction season anymore?
Well, barring earthquakes, which was a paradigm shift when I came in, what you see outside of that I'm initiating is closing out old permits. That's when they do their training, when they take their accumulated leave, so we have more staff available. We encourage leave outside of that time frame. There is also ongoing activity. Not all construction is done there. There is a certain level done year-round. There's a lower demand, but that's when we try to concentrate leave, training, other functions, and also code adoption processes for updating the codes. And also, frankly, we have just some permit cleanups to do next year.
Thank you. Do you guys have anything left in your presentation?
I don't believe so, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, great. So I have a couple questions, and then I think we'll wrap it up. Ms. LaFrance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So to summarize, this is another area where costs or fees haven't kept up with the actual costs, right? In here it says no increases since 2009, most of these. And so most of the fees will go up, though there may be some cost savings due to not having to pay for subsequent or the first inspection to some people. What kinds of feedback have you gotten, like, from industry so far? I know you mentioned with the S1 version, but are you getting mostly positive
Yeah, so
responses?
through the chair, the S version includes an important provision of important protection, if you will, against fraudulent valuations, and that was the result of meeting with the Anchorage Home Builders Association. That was very helpful. We also got some feedback on clarifications that were important to that industry around the recurring fee, or the penalty, as I like to call it, the $350, if we're called back multiple times with the same issue. Providing clarity to that group really helped as well. As far as wide open arms and reception to this, I haven't gotten a lot of emails that say yay, but I also haven't gotten a lot of emails that say this is the end of construction in Anchorage. So I think people recognize, and I won't speak on behalf of HBA or any other trade group in the construction industry, but I think people recognize that the cost of everything has gone up over the past 10 years. So perhaps an adjustment in fees is due.
Thank you. Mr. Wells.
I guess there's a couple points. We have one that I think is probably a fair point for the home builders is, they had that 181 fund that's got to be that was supposed to moderate the thing. So clearly nothing's gone on for 10 years, but now all of a sudden, boom, from remodels, it looks like there's some fairly large increases. And they say, okay, well, that fund was there so you can moderate that, but that's essentially gone. We had
So through the chair, that's partially correct. So the first statement about the building fund is correct, that it's designed to be a self-supporting fund so that in fat years you've got cash to carry you through in lean years. However, that entire equation got upended in 2009 when the entire underlying fee structure changed so significantly. You were no longer in a position where you were able to put adequate revenue into that fund to cover outlying expenses. So we have been in a deficit situation for quite a while. Where this administration has remained focused is on the service, the level of service. And yes, we are spending more annually in delivering our service than the building fund will support. This does not completely fix that problem, but it at least right sizes the underlying formulas that go into levying and collecting the fees, so that at some point, perhaps that BSSA fund is flush again.
And through the chair, right now, residential construction will continue to have a rate that's 60%, 0.09 versus 0.015 of the price of commercial construction. That will continue here. So, and commercial construction is 80% of our activity. Residential is 20%, and it is in that commercial large renovations where that fiscal gap is truly exacerbated. It's not on the $15,000 or the $100,000 residential job even. It is on those multi-million-dollar ones that are really creating that gap in between revenue and expense.
So when you say 0.6, because your ICC code is substantially lower than the true cost, what is this 0.6?
He's talking about the multiplier.
I'm talking about the multipliers for valuation. If you
Trying to find it.
well, he's frantically flipping back. If you think of how we set the price once we determine valuation, we have two different prices here. And for instance, right now, the home builders will, for a residential or a duplex, it's 0.009. For a comparably priced, most of the time comparably priced, commercial one's 0.015. That's 60% of that 0.009, 60% of the 0.015. That was my point. It's a lower rate than we charge commercial folks.
And that's not changing. From
That's
the
the same.
That's the same.
Thank you. Ms. Salto?
Just quickly, you said for a residential or duplex, anything above a duplex kicks into commercial?
That's correct. Anything above duplex is considered commercial under the International Building Code.
Thank you.
And Mr. Peterson, did you have a question?
Just a general question, do other cities or jurisdictions try to break even on their building department permits or just?
Yeah, through the chair, if I may, we're very unique. Anchorage is a little bit of a unique beast. That being said, in looking across the country at multiple building departments where the fees collected are actually just part of the general revenue picture for that given city, they strive for the same goal, which is the fees collected cover the service delivered to the people that are requesting it. These are services for individuals or companies, right? This is not an area-wide, at this time, area-wide power, so it's fair that the fees collected should cover the cost.
Okay, just wondering, thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Mr. Middleton.
So when you did this, I mean, we, you know, in developing commercial and developing Anchorage, I said, we're a small part of the equation. The big part is the builders. And you kind of think we're a team in growing Anchorage. But calling on was, we just heard about this 2 weeks ago. And it seems like show this to the builders, commercial and residential, and say, look, here's our problem. How do we resolve this?
So, if I may, through the
What is
chair,
their role in this?
we did, I think our first meeting with the Anchorage Home Builders Association was 2.5 weeks ago, and we have shared it with some of the other building boards, or trade groups, I guess. But I do see your point. Not everyone pays attention to email in the height of construction season, or not everyone's a member of these organizations, so there's probably people that we are missing.
And through the chair, I met with ICR President of the HBA and back. I met with him and Ron Thompson months ago to talk about this disconnect we have between revenue and expenses. We went forward and developed something. We did just meet with the HBA a couple weeks ago, and I've otherwise been reaching out to discuss it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.